During the war period, the Germans used to bring food in here on barges, the French river barges, and they used to have like a tug that would tug two barges along at a time. These were long, very long river barges, and but very shallow. But sometimes they try to take a shortcut into St Helier Harbour, and they get wrecked on the rocks, which are just outside the house. Well, there was one barge that got sank on the rocks just by the Demi Depart. And what what happened was that a lot of stuff was floating in off the barge. It was full of food and that. And Silver Larish, who was a pilot, and another pilot, I forget who it was, and a load of us kids, we went out with them, out as far as we could on the rocks at low tide. And then the last gully, Silver Larish tied a rope around himself, and two of them went out, swam across this big gully, which is the width between the rocks with water in, and they got to the barge. Well, the Germans were on the barge, and because there was a lot of cognac and French wines and all that, the Germans were drunk on board, and they all knew Silver Larish because he was a pilot and he normally would be piloting these boats in, and he virtually got sloshed there. But he brought a lot of stuff back off the barge because it was illegal basically to take anything what was called flotsam and jetsam during the war. You were not really supposed to take it off the beach. But us kids, we used to, whatever there was coming in, we did. But a lot of that stuff on this particular boat was onions, and the beach was full of onions. But of course they were covered in salt and muck, and they weren't really very satisfactory to eat at that time. Then another time, the Germans had sports days here, and where we live is right close to the FB fields, Florence Boots fields, and it was football pitches and cricket pitches there all through the war. But the Germans had these sports days there, and I tell you what, they were really fantastic. Well, the grown-ups didn't ever go there, but us kids, we always watched watch what was going on. And there was one chap was on the not parallel bars, a single bar, swinging around and around, and he came off there and he landed on his neck. I'm surprised he wasn't killed but it was really something to watch. And the Germans would have bands there and all that sort of thing. So we didn't get involved. We just stood and watched what was going on. And that was just one of the many things that happened during the war. Then we went to, I went to school here, and I did night school here, and that was my best education, was at Lamott Street School. Now, I went to the beaches, first of all, but my best education was with Minty and Colonel Eden, and that was night school. And I did that for 3 or 4 years. I also built motor cars. I built a Mercedes-Benz. I bought a chassis for £25, and it was an armoured car, and it was really quite some motor car that I ended up with. But it was not fit for racing. It was only really an ordinary chassis, and I should have known better. But I was only 17 at the time, or 16, 17 when I built that car. So I had no idea of what I was really doing, except that my dad assisted me in helping to build that car. I've never been sports-minded. Never ever. If I lifted a cricket bat, the ball would go straight underneath. I was never able to play sports. Football, I was just as bad. but sport and I never really got on very well. During the war, my dad made crystal sets. Now, crystal set was a radio that had a little tiny crystal which you made from lead and sulfur. And the lead and sulfur created like I don't know what you call it, but it was a porous sort of thing. But if you with the crystal set, you had what they called the cat's whisker, and the cat's whisker you wobbled all over this piece of material, and you had a headphone, and you could actually pick up the BBC on this particular unit. Now the unit that my dad made it was mounted on a domino. So it was about an inch and a half long, or maybe, yeah, just inch and a half by an inch wide, and mounted with that would hold the lead sulfur, and which was my dad had made it so that it was clamped, got little tiny screws which held a little piece of metal into place. Then the cat's whisker. Look, I can't tell you exactly how how it was made, but Ariel was very clever. My dad drilled a hole in the screw, and the screw went into the telephone, that little black box that the telephones have, and he connected the screw inside the box to the telephone lines. So our aerial was actually the telephone lines, and what he got was a piece of brazing wire, very thin wire, which he put into the head of the screw as the aerial. It was very, very clever. The chap from the telephones supplied us with the headphone. Just a single headphone you had, so that if anything happened, you could quickly put it in your pocket, the whole caboose. Now, my dad also made a boat, and it was about a meter long, and it was really a very modern, almost like the German torpedo boats they had in the harbour here. And he made that in Birmingham before he came to Jersey, so it would have been 1933-34. Now that's 90 odd years ago, and we tried to use in those days a battery was an accumulator, and an accumulator weighed something like 10 or 15 pounds, and it was a big thing. And we had the electric motor, and we had the propeller and everything. He got it all going. But it was never successful because we never were able to put a proper motor in. With a modern battery, which would lay flat in the bottom of the boat, and a small electric motor, that would go like the clappers, and especially if you could put a radio on it, because you wanted to be able to turn and return back to you. You wouldn't want it to go out to sea. But that would be wonderful if that was going again. I'd love to see it go. The other things that have happened to me were I've done so many things that I forget what I've actually done. But we came to Jersey very often, and we are always looking out for a house. We spent maybe 5 or 10 years looking at different properties, and eventually my mum rang me up to tell me that a house was for sale that was on the corner of the avenue, and I knew exactly where it was. It was called Le Croix d'Azur. And so she told me who was living in the house, and I got him on the phone, and I spoke to the lady concerned, and I got her to give me first refusal for a week, and so I got on a plane, came to Jersey. I had lunch with my mum before I came across the road, because it was only across the road from where my mum was. Came across, and the lady was there at the specified time, say 2:30. And within a half an hour, I'd actually bought the house. And what happened was the chap I bought it from, the lady and gent I bought it from, they were bookmakers, and so I had to go to their house, which was at Green Island, to explain what money I'd got, because my money was all tied up, and I couldn't do something like immediately. It would take a few days to unravel. So I showed Mr. O'Connor, the old Mr. O'Connor, showed him what funds I got, and I could pay for the house. It was £175,000 at the time, and that I. She wanted to take away some of the mirrors and things. And I said, no, it's footstoots. It's as it is. That's it. That's how I want to buy the house. But when I went there, it was so funny. The lady brought, Mr. O'Connor's wife was much younger than he was. And she brought a tray of tea in, and we all had tea. And I looked at her and I said, I know you. And the old man thought I was making a pass at his wife. And he said, my wife is Lord Fortey's niece. Well, I burst out laughing, and then I got hold of I just moved my hands backwards and forwards, because she used to work on the coffee machine, which was steam operated. So every time she switched the handle, it went, and when I said that to her, she roared with laughter, and she said, you've known me for so long. She said, I couldn't even speak English at that time. And it was lovely. That was Lord Fortey's niece. And now my cousin Jean Worthington, well, it's not Worthington now, but she's married to a chap who worked with Lord Fortey for 20 or 30 years. And Jean, I've only recently made contact with her again. And he's the organist at a church in the same area as our friend Leonard Johnson's in. So I must try and get hold of Philip and just find out if they know each other. I tried to phone Philip the other day, but without success. Now, Paul had a nasty accident. I don't know if I've spoken about that, but my son Paul had a nasty accident in the Metopus, and he slipped down a kopje, which is a big hill, and it was full of algae, and he slid to the bottom, broke his legs, and he ended up, some guys brought him up on a tarpaulin and got him in the back of a truck, got him into hospital quickly. And Paul was unconscious there for going on for 8 or 9 weeks. Now, he's just recovering now from the virus, this thing that's hit everybody in Europe, all over the world. And he was one of the first people. He's on his 99th day in hospital today. And it's a miracle, with the prayers of all the people around the world, and the skills of the nurses and doctors. He's survived out of the many, many that have passed on. We're very grateful for that. We've kept a candle alight on the table. It's on the table in front of me now, all through this terrible period that we've all gone through. And we're grateful for all. Now, his grandchildren were able to see him through a window, and Sue, he's now in Bridge North, where he's learning to walk and to climb stairs, and it's anticipated he will go home within a week's time, week or 10 days. But that he's one of the longest people in England to have been cured of this particular virus. So it's a miracle in itself. I'm fortunate with my three kids. I'm very, very fortunate. I've got Paul, Jeremy, and Debbie, and they are fabulous. They've all done well in their own ways, and I'm very proud of them all. And they each have got families, and the families are all doing well. It's absolutely wonderful to see them all in their own ways, expanding their knowledge. Jonathan yesterday he got a distinction at university for his first year, and that was nice. Stephen's got a job with the mines, and I watched a program of the Australian mines, BGC, and gee, it was a huge iron ore mines, huge, up in the north of Perth, 1,500 mile away. It was as far as Bulawayo to Cape Town, and I saw that on. I watch YouTube all the time, and if only I'd had YouTube 50 years ago, I wouldn't have made the mistakes I make today, or I have made in my life. Yeah. Then I'd like to talk about really some of the people that have worked with us. Philemon, Prayer. Oh, I must mention that we had an exhibition in Salisbury, and at that exhibition, we'd only got a small stand there, and there was a chap who was the headmaster for Goromonzi School. Now, I've gone and forgotten his name, and it's always fresh in my mind, that particular individual. He was the headmaster of Goromonzi. And he said to me, Trevor, I've got some lads that are quite bright. They've just finished their A-levels, and I've got to find them jobs. So I said, oh, send me one down. Well, Peter sent me down 4 or 5 chaps from Goromonzi to Bulawayo, sent them all down, and I don't know whether I paid or he paid to come down. And when they came down, all 5 of them, they were all bright, and well, I can't send these 5 boys back all 1,500 miles, 500 or 600 miles. It'd be very unfair. So I took the lot on, all of them, whether I got jobs for them or not. But the ones that were the most successful, that worked with us, were those who were draftsmen or could draw. And I'd got a drawing office, but I'd got nobody really working in that drawing office. It was me. And so I had 2 chaps that worked in the drawing office, and they were very, very successful. Now, another one of those boys ended up as a director of Standard Bank in Zimbabwe. Now, I can't tell you his name, I've forgotten, but he blotted his copybook there, regrettably. But and another one of them has become in Ireland, and he makes contact with me, but I'm not too sure his name. But he was one of those highly intellectual chaps, and he became a professor or something in Ireland, in the medical industry. So they've all done well, some of these lads. One can only be very proud of them, of all the staff. Then there was, we had some wonderful people work for us in Radiator and Tinning. Pen Owen was a bit too strict at times, um, and a bit excessively strict. I don't know if I've mentioned, but Ron Van Ucht, when he worked for us, he was very strict too. And one of the boys walked out with a ruler, a tape measure in his pocket, you know, a 6 foot, went home with it in his pocket, and he brought it back the next morning. But Ron fired him for taking it out of the works. Well, I always felt that that was a wrong thing to do. I mean, I walk out of places with a tape measure in my hand. In my pocket. I did it in a shop in Durban to myself, but I took it back the next day. And the shop was didn't know how I got out with it, but they said it was an embarrassment for them to accept it back. So what I did, I took advice from one of the clergy in Bulawayo. We got one of the clergy had got a lampshade factory, and he made lampshades. I kind of forgotten his name for a minute. And I asked him, what would you do in a case like that? Yeah, morally it was totally incorrect what Ron has done. And he said, well, what you've got to do is the best for the most. And that meant I had to let this particular individual go. So I was very upset about that. Now, also, one of the things that I'd got in Bulawayo was a turret press. In fact, I got 2 turret presses. Now, these turret presses had got tables which were 10 foot by 5 foot, and it was a moving table, which I could put a sheet of metal 10 foot by 5 foot on it and punch a hole anywhere in it. Now that turret press had got 32 tools on it. Now, and the turret rotated electrically and pegged in. And I got one African chap there, I've forgotten his name now, and he could punch 58 holes a minute in a plate of metal, and that was a stop, dwell, and move along an inch, say, and punch another hole, but he was very, very good on that. Now, I did come to Jersey to buy a DC motor and switchgear that would have automated that machine, which was in my stores. I never put it on, or we put it on, but I was never computer orientated in any way. And it was very difficult to find people that had got the knowledge in those days of CNC or simple CNC, if you know what I mean. But they were fabulous presses. I could punch in quarter plate. I used to do the mining screens, and I would use in quarter plates, I would knock a 2-inch hole, but it would clonk, you know. And because when I did very heavy metal, the press was huge. It would open the back of the neck of the press. So what I did, I put a mezzanine floor above it, and so that with the weights on it, so that it would reduce the amount of spring in the actual press body itself. But that was those presses were made by Scottish Machine Tool, and they were really fabulous presses.
At that point, Dad, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So there's quite a lot of opportunity that was available in Rhodesia then to do a lot of different things. So your factory went from radiators to non-ferrous metal to sheet metal to a variety of things. Just a minute. So the whole UDI, could you just talk about UDI and what impact that was for your company?
Well, I'm going to speak about the development within Zimbabwe. But one of the things that I did wrong throughout my life was I tried to make machinery, and I was very successful in making various machines. Yes, but I should have bought machines that were really, really top end, and I got some top end machines. But the reason I did that was my dad used to make his own machinery, and I suppose it was something off the old block, was the fact that he made his machinery and I had to try and do the same. And that was really a mistake. Well, from the very start, Jersey panels, Radiator and Tinning, we started off in Jameson Street and 15th Avenue in 400 square feet, a double garage. And we grew and we grew and we grew. Well, eventually we moved to alongside almost Bristol Road, the canal there. And it's quite funny because I worked at Rangeland, and Rangeland used to face the property that ended up as Radiator and Tinning across the river. And I watched that river being built, and that would have been in 1953 when they brick-lined that canal that was there. Now, what we carried on, we bought various properties, and the trouble was I suppose I'd got a long-term view of what I wanted to do, and I was a bit. I always managed to get over problems, and whenever something went wrong, and the trade wasn't good enough, or trade dropped off in a particular line, I would actually look for another line so to absorb my labor, because I'd got a lot of people that I had to keep employed. And the labor laws within Rhodesia were very, very good. When I look back, they're better than they are here in Europe, because you couldn't just fire. Well, you could have, if somebody had done something wrong, you could fire them, yes. But now in Europe here, they have fixed like contract workers, where they're on a contract. Paul is on one of these sort of things, where when a job comes to an end, they can just say, "You're off, go." Where that you couldn't have done in Rhodesia. You couldn't just put people down. So it was, and they were very, very strict, the government, on the number of toilets to the number of people you employed. Very, very strict on that. You had to have European toilets, you had to have African toilets, and you had to ladies' toilets and gents' toilets. In fact, toilets became a pain in the backside, to be quite frank with you, until we bought HomeBuild, and we got lots of toilets within that particular property. But we were always short of toilets, and that was one of my biggest problems. The other big problem I had, and it's something that all the youngsters should think of today, is to make sure that you've always got a compressor that's big enough to do the jobs you need to do. Possibly not so much today, because I'm talking 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you used air tools, and you used electricity and air, and the air tools were safer than electricity in a large degree, because you couldn't get an electric shock from them, and they weren't so likely to be stolen because the individuals wouldn't have the facility for the compressor. But we were always short of air until I
Dad,
bought
are you there?
3.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think um, what would be interesting for people to hear is just generally about UDI and the business environment, not the detail of. If you could just talk about business, what happened politically in Rhodesia was um, colonialism up to into the 1950s, 60s. Then um, there was the break from Britain. UDI was called, and then the
Yeah,
war. Could you just give a general
I got
picture of
on
what
to it.
business was like?
Well, when UDI happened, we were already going galloping ahead as a firm, and we'd got a sheet metal department, and there was what we did. Um, you couldn't export from Rhodesia, so we had to find a means of exporting uh, from Rhodesia. So what we did, I bought a plot in Botswana, in Francistown, and that plot was, in fact, I was very silly. I should have bought a much bigger plot. I paid about £350 for this plot. I was one of the very first factories to be in Francistown, or should really say almost Botswana. The only people that were in Botswana at that time was the Haskins and another chap who got a garage there, who came from Bulawayo from Main Motors, and so what I did, I opened the factory in Botswana. Had to build the place, and it was very, very rough. And we actually was sending stuff from Bulawayo to Botswana and then re-exporting it from Botswana. But we had to have an elementary manufacturing place in Botswana. So we had got machinery down there, but it was very, very skimpy. It couldn't have done the things that we did from Botswana. We exported bronze, motor car radiators. We even supplied Zambia. But one of the things that happened there was we had a lady there, I've forgotten her name for now, and she was in charge, and I'd sent 2 or 3 Africans down from Bulawayo to work there and to make the odd radiator down there. And what happened was when Rhodesia broke away from Zambia and Nyasaland, that was a complete breakup. And that was when and that I think was prior to 1966. But what happened? One of the customs officers, all the customs used to be in the history of Rhodesia was there was a federation. Now, the federation to me was a God-given gift of all those 3 countries joined together because they all had assets which really supported each country. Nyasaland had the most marvelous fishing industry, and it was so green and beautiful countryside, and so the agriculture there was fantastic. Northern Rhodesia, it was more industrial. It was a copper mines, very, very affluent sort of area, but doing very, very well on their own. And Rhodesia was a country which was up to the UDI part, well, when the breakup of the Federation, when it broke up, we had a chap called Sir Roy Walensky, who was the president or the kingpin of the Federation. Now, when he died completely broke, and the Jewish community had to pay for his funeral. That's, you know, that's how straight and non-corruptive the governments were in those days. Now, the Southern Rhodesia government was exactly the same. The civil service in Rhodesia, and I knew a lot of them, and they were so straight. They were actually recruited from England, a lot of them, a lot of South Africans too, well, all countries, from all countries, and but they were all so incorruptible in any way. There was no way that you could offer a chap a bottle of whiskey or anything like that in those days. The police force in Rhodesia was fantastic. The BSAP, they're full of young men from all over the world, and they would be given responsibilities which were far beyond uh, um, normal capacity of an ordinary policeman. You take the Hillside Police Station in Bulawayo. That covered an area of something, ah, 500 square miles or something like that. And there's in that particular place, they had horses. In those days, the policemen, and they go out on horseback, and in fact, and they had motorbikes as well in those days, lots and lots of motorbikes, and but they were a fabulous force uh, for good. Because most of them had been recruited from England. There was an organisation in England that bought all the stuff for governments and that. I forget what it was called now. It's in a place that began with a W, Wokington or something like that. And it was a fabulous police force. They had a police reserve as well, and that police reserve was quite good. We had one chap who worked for us, and he on his own he was given a camp to look after thousands of people in this camp, and he got a rifle with a grenade in the top, and but he was just a single person, and he was looking after herds of cattle, huge herds of cattle, with all these different chiefs and that, with all these people, and when he was whipping away with this whip, he whipped the grenade off his rifle, and it exploded. Fortunately for him, it only injured him. It didn't kill him, and it should have killed him because he came back to work afterwards. But those were things that happened during UDI period, and from I don't know if was a stupid person, but I never took an awful lot of interest in politics as such. I wasn't, and I didn't understand the local politics. In the early days, there was a chap called Garfield Todd, and Garfield Todd was very liberal, and because he was very liberal, he got voted out of power. But it was said that he had bought where Bulawayo Airport stands today. It was said that Garfield Todd had actually bought that property to sell for an airport. But Freddie Wigley, who was Bulawayo Board of Executors and one of the chaps on the IDC board, told me personally that was totally untrue, that rumour. And but Freddie Wigley was he was a church warden of St. John's, and he was a wonderful person actually. He got us our first loan on the IDC, which was to buy radiator machinery for £1,900. And Dr. Fixel was the boss of Barter Shoe. He was the chairman of the IDC board at that time. And Wigley said, well, look, you guys never put any money into Bulawayo. He said, this is a small firm. Let's give it, support it. And from that, Freddie Wigley got me my first loan with the IDC and an introduction to the IDC, because I ended up having 3 loans from the IDC. And the last one was a big loan. Can't tell you how much it was, I've forgotten now, but it may have been £200,000 or something like that. A lot of money in those days. But then when it came to paying back, there was inflation, not as bad as it was later on, but as much as I paid back, I still owed as much as what I started off with. This inflation, really, if you've got a big loan out, it's very, very difficult to pay it off. But eventually we paid that loan off. And it was very, very soul destroying to have galloping inflation. And that's what they've got in Zimbabwe now. And it's this, what the secret for Zimbabwe, to me, is for it to get going again, is to really make gold, back the money with gold, and they've got plenty of gold and diamonds. Surely that should be put on one side and cover the currency, and that will cure all the troubles that Zimbabwe's got at the moment. I just hope that somebody comes up with really something solid like that, because no other country really has got a gold standard. Britain sold its gold
If you reflect
very
back,
stupidly.
what was your experience of Rhodesia and Zimbabwe? What do you think? Okay, so what was the lifestyle like? I mean, you've obviously, a lot of your energy went into Radiator and Tinning, but do you think it was a positive move moving to Rhodesia? What were the benefits? What were the drawbacks? How did you experience
Well,
Rhodesia,
I
both in
think
the early days and during,
you mean
bringing in
UDI.
mind the early days, UDI, guerrilla war, and the economic chaos? Overall, what do you think?
All right, okay. Well, after UDI, there was a lot of guerrilla activity. Now, I never came in contact with any of that, and I never realized how intense it must have been. And both Paul and Jeremy were in the army. Paul was at Llewellyn Barracks, and I think Jeremy must have been there too. And they had 3 months training. Then they went all over the place. Now, Jeremy was a cipher clerk, and he had the radios in those days were very, very heavy. I think they were called 18 or 19 sets, and they had to carry these radios on their backs, and they weren't. Paul was also in the signals as well, and to carry these things around, not like the modern telephone which you can hold in your hand. The technology at that time was totally different. Well, one of the beauties of that, what happened to Jeremy, was that some chaps were taking pot shots at puppies, and they've got one puppy, one dog puppy, which he put into a Coca-Cola box and sent it down to our office in Salisbury, and from there put it on swift transport down to Bulawayo, And so it must have travelled something like 600 or 700 miles, this puppy. And it was a real mongrel. And we also had another big dog, a pedigree dog. Now, those two dogs were absolutely wonderful friends. You couldn't believe that a mongrel and I've forgotten the other dog's name, and how they could be such great friends. Well, one of them died, and you know that the other one died within 3 weeks of the other one dying. You can't believe the love that two animals can have for each other. And thank you, Jeremy, for Punny. His name was Punny, and where the name came from, God only knows. But she was lovely. Thank you, Jeremy, for bringing Punny into our lives. But during the friends we had was Rodney and Morton, and he worked for Ever Ready Company. Then he went back to South Africa, and they lived in Durban. So we lost contact with them. There was also Brian Martin. He worked for Burroughs Machines. Now, he used to work on the lawn of his house, and he'd have the machine. These were very complicated machines, but they were really the original computers, really, the Burroughs machine and the National Cash machine. Also, we were friends with a chap from National Cash. I've forgotten his name now. And this was like a gang of us. We'd go out into the Metopus and we'd have picnics out there. We used to go to a place called Malimi Dam. That was lovely out there. But it's quite a long, these places are all 30 miles out of town. And we go up into the Metopus. And that was lovely. We had another dam that Eric and Nina went to. Also, I had a friend who worked at the technical college. I had a couple of friends there. Finn Jensen, who was a brilliant engineer and an artist. I've got one of his paintings on my wall at the moment. And John Bowman. They were all great people. And what I did with John was the heat engines engineer at the technical college, and I built a wind tunnel there to test radiators and heat exchangers so as to create graphs. And I built it really for the technical college itself, that they would use for experimenting with as well. But John, unfortunately, got taken by a crocodile only a couple of years ago, and very sorry to have lost a good friend in such a manner. We also, I had cars. There was a chap in Zambia who used to come down from Zambia to buy radiators. He came from Kitwe, and one day he came to me. He says, "Trevor, there's no way I can get money to you." He said, "So look, my car's outside. It's brand new. Will you take it off me in exchange for your bill?" So I ended up with a Rover 3-litre, the first virtually new car I'd ever had well, not quite. We'd got Fords and that in those days. But that was how I got my first big car. Then what else have I got? I bought my Daimler. I bought in Jersey, and that I bought at an auction. I think I paid £700 for that, and it had got 20,000 miles on the clock, but it was in beautiful condition. It belonged to one of Jersey's benefactors here, a very wealthy man. Previous to me, I only saw that in the logbook when it got back to Bulawayo. And what we did, we got the car, licensed it in Jersey, and got Debbie to take it to England on the ferry. And then she drove it up to London. Now, she'd never been to London or anywhere, and she'd not really driven this. And she drove it and put it in a container and shipped it to Durban. Then, then Margaret and I, we went down to Durban and picked up the car and took it up to Bulawayo. Now, that must have been in I can't tell you, about 1990 or something like that, or even maybe earlier than that. But no, those were the two loves of my life, for those two cars. But I got, with the Daimler, I was driving between Bulawayo and Gwello, and I got stopped for driving over the speed limit, and I got a fine there. And then after I'd left there, I carried on to Gwello, and then I was driving through on the road that goes through past the mine, through to the other road that goes up to Salisbury or Harare. That was the main Bipe Bridge road that goes through. And I got caught for a second speeding ticket, all within an hour. I got 2 speeding tickets along these roads with that particular car. And it was really quite dangerous in a way, driving in Zimbabwe or Rhodesia. One day I was driving, and because I used to drive from Bulawayo to Salisbury or Harare, I'd leave early in the morning, say 4 o'clock in the morning, and be in Harare by about 8:30, 9 o'clock. So I could, I used to, it was only 270, 280 miles or something like that. And the roads in the early days were bad. They were strip roads. In fact, I can talk about that. In the very early days of my being in Rhodesia, most of the roads were strips. And that was 18 inches wide of concrete with a gap in between, of which you would drive. If a car was coming in the other direction, you give him one strip, and you'd have the other strip. Motorbikes, you gave the strip too as well, coming in the other direction. But the roads were virtually non-existent, except the only piece of tar was about 20 miles outside of Gwello and into Gwello itself. And I think that got tarred because they got a railway junction at there. I've forgotten the name of it now. It was a railway line there. The other thing that we did during the period of UDI, they'd got electric locomotives. I can't tell you. They had, first of all, the railways always used steam for the railways. They had hundreds and hundreds of railway locomotives, beautiful locomotives. Garretts, they were called. And they'd have big water bowsers on the front and water bowsers on the back, because there was no water they could pick up along the railway lines in those days. And it was all basically a single track with loop lines so as to pass. Then they went on to diesel electrics. And those diesel electrics, they picked up electricity. No, they went straight onto electric. Because they had, I made the first catenary for the catenary. There was the cable that the train picked up, and it was like an acorn-shaped section. And Radiator and Tinning made the first 20 miles of that into Gwello, and very proud of that. But we lost that job because BICC, or Rhodesia Cables, they got it through their main company, uh, which was an English company, to supply the railway line and the all the structures for the electrification of the railways. But of course, that was, in a way, for Zimbabwe, the steam locomotives would have been better even today, because the what happened, that the Africans used to, or certain people would actually steal. They'd actually throw something and short the cable, and they would actually cut the catenary, and so the trains couldn't run. And they also, being Radiator and Tinning was a company where we made brasses and bronzes, and we bought a lot of scrap metal. And during this, because we bought a lot of scrap metal, we had a wonderful metal merchants association. And what happened was, people would steal the copper and they would export it, but not bring it to people like ourselves who would use it and report it to the police if it came in. But what they used to do was they would actually go and see where a pylon was at right angles, and they would cut the pylon at the bottom, so the weight of the cables would actually pull the pylon down. And when the pylon dropped, because of the distance between Bulawayo and Gwello, that was 100 miles, 110 miles, the police couldn't get there fast enough to catch these people. And what they used to do was they used to get a truck that's got twin rears on it. They'd take one of the wheels off and use the drum, the brake drum, and wind the cables because once the power line, the power dropped down, it would flash out, and all electricity, there would be no electricity in the wires, because it would all be dead. So they would then tie that to the wheel rim and just wind up the cables and chuck them on their vehicles and drive away and hide somewhere in the bush. Now, that happened many, many times. And the police would be right to Radiator and Tinning right away. We were their first port of call for any theft. But we had very good relations with the police when it came to scrap dealing. And because there was one special department which looked after scrap, and there was one African there. He was... I can't tell you what his rank was, but he was above an ordinary policeman. And if you wanted to export any metal, you had to go to him, and he would actually sign the piece of the papers for you to export that particular material. And it wasn't scrap, because we were selling a product. And so, everything was very, very much above board. Now, somebody came into his department with a paper for him to sign, because when you exported, you had to show the product to the police what you were exporting. And this chap said, well, I've got to see, this policeman said to these chaps, I've got to see what you're exporting. And they said, no, you sign it. And he refused. And they said, well, if you don't sign it, you won't be sitting in that chair in the next, in a couple of weeks' time. He ended up as being in charge of bicycles at Hillside Police Station, that particular policeman. And that was the start of things going wrong in Zimbabwe, when they could threaten a policeman like that. Somebody could threaten a policeman.